know which is scarier, Annabelle or how inconsistent this franchise has been. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. Today I'm going to be ranking the 9 films of the Conjuring Universe as part of my franchise Rankography series. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. So what is a Rankography exactly? Well, it's my ranking of a filmography, whether that be a director's output, an actor's appearances, or even an entire franchise. My rankographies are based on personal preference, and I rank movies according to how much I enjoyed them rather than any specific technical merit or attribute. Remember, this is just my ranking, not the ranking, so be sure to post your own personal ranking of the Conjuring Universe in the comments below. It's not really that uncommon for long-running franchises to show some degree of variation when it comes to quality. This seems to especially be the case with horror franchises, which have a tendency to start off strong and then fizzle out after another movie or two. The Conjuring universe is a very bizarre mix when it comes to quality, not really following any of the expected patterns. Interestingly, for a horror franchise, the production value and especially the cinematography is almost always good in these films. It's the story where we see some unfortunate variation. We've got a franchise that had some of the best, most effective horror of the last decade, and also had some of the most disappointing and underwhelming horror of the last decade. And so I think the franchise balances out to be fairly average overall, but it's definitely got some very bright spots. I've already reviewed all 9 of these movies on this channel, so if you want to check those out for some more in-depth thoughts on each of them, I'll put links in the description below, and also link some of them up in the cards as we go along. Alright, let's get this rankography started. Coming in at number 9, The Nun. This is probably the most frustrating movie in the entire franchise for me. Not only because it's my least favorite of the franchise, but also because it truly did have a lot of potential that isn't even remotely capitalized on. The nun as a character is incredibly creepy. Her introduction in The Conjuring 2 was beyond unsettling, and so the prospect of a movie about her and her backstory was really exciting. And I will say that this movie starts off decently. The initial premise and the first act are fine. They do what a horror movie opening should do: creep you out a little, deliver a mystery that you want answers to, and introduce the main characters. And so that first act sets up all this interesting stuff, but then abandons most of it in favor of one of the most generic horror stories you could come up with. And this story is where much of my frustration with this movie comes from. It's such an incredibly dull mess. Plot threads get added and dropped seemingly at random throughout the movie, characters are downright imbecilic in their choices, and all the major events of the story are the result of things that are just too convenient to be reasonable, with characters showing up at exactly the right or wrong moment every time. These story beats and situations become repetitive very quickly, as do the scares, or perhaps more accurately, attempted scares. There are a few fleeting moments of vaguely creepy imagery here, but for the most part, this is jump scare the movie. There's no real tension here, just a bunch of repetitive, cheap startle moments. Coming in at number 8, Annabelle. Here we've got yet another example of wasted potential in this franchise. Just like Valak, or the nun character, Annabelle had a very creepy and effective introduction in the first Conjuring film. That little opening to the movie made you interested in this character's backstory, and so I remember being pretty excited for this film. But just like with the nun, this movie isn't able to conjure any sort of real scares. I facetiously referred to the aforementioned Nun film as Jump Scare the Movie, but before that film took over the title, Annabelle was the jump scare leader of the franchise. The character certainly looks creepy, so suddenly putting her face on camera with some loud screechy music is bound to get the audience to jump, but it's not a satisfying scare. I will say that this is a movie I appreciate slightly more on rewatch, if only because I know what to expect. The first Conjuring film was a creepy, tension-filled movie that set the bar really high, and so coming into Annabelle for the first time and realizing how big of a step down it was made it feel extra disappointing. It's got some nice cinematography and a few really effective long tracking shots, but this movie fails when it comes to delivering its story. After the first act, there's never any real tension. With stories like this, that sort of go back and forth between psychological and supernatural horror, the fear comes from the unknown. It comes from the mystery, from trying to figure out if what's happening is real or not, from the things you don't actually see. But this movie makes the mistake of explicitly telling us what's happening and showing us things that would have been better left to our imagination, which results in a film that never reaches any sort of peak in tension. Coming in at number 7, The Nun II. We're only 3 movies into the ranking, but we've already hit the transition point from movies in the franchise I don't like to ones that I enjoy. I don't think this movie's great by any stretch of the imagination, but it's an enjoyable popcorn horror film and a big improvement over the first Nun movie. This one doesn't feel like quite as much of an outlier, and even though it's still overloaded with jump scares, they're usually more fun than annoying. The frequency does disrupt the tension building a bit, but the fact that there is tension here at points is a huge change from the Nun's last solo outing. She's still underutilized as a character here, and the film isn't something that I personally consider to be very scary, but there are definitely some unsettling moments, including the introduction of a creepy creature during the third act, and a cool but chilling magazine scene earlier on. Like its predecessor, the story here isn't the greatest, full of plot holes and drop story threads, but at least it's interesting this time around. Both Nun movies have featured an investigation, but the mystery and case-solving elements of the story are much stronger in this sequel, effectively blending mystery thriller with supernatural horror. It's predictable and gets repetitive from time to time, but it remains engaging throughout, boasting some impressive production design that really contributes to the overall atmosphere. It's still not a movie that feels worthy of the character's chilling potential, as put forward in The Conjuring 2, but at least it's another step in the right direction. Coming in at number 6, Annabelle Creation. I have my issues with this movie, but I think it's quite a bit better than that first Annabelle film. This is another movie in the franchise that comes on the heels of a strong film, The Conjuring 2 this time around, which once again negatively affects this one when you're watching them in order. But luckily, the drop in quality is not as significant this time around, which is pretty impressive actually. I mean, this is a sequel to a fairly disappointing spin-off of a horror movie, so it should have been terrible, but it ended up being decent. This movie has the same really impressive cinematography that most of the franchise's films have, but unlike with the first Annabelle movie, this one's genuinely creepy. It still has its jump scare moments, but blends that modern horror style with a more classic atmospheric tension building style. Aspects of the story and some of the characters do drag it down a bit, but the film does a really good job of creating a very creepy atmosphere anytime the Annabelle doll is involved. I mentioned it before, but with these stories, the things that we don't see are often scarier than what we do actually see. And this movie really effectively incorporates that concept, showing us pieces of the horror, but letting our imaginations fill in the gaps. Coming in at number 5, The Curse of La Llorona. So I have a feeling that this is probably the most controversially placed film on this list. Not only because of the generally negative reception to the movie, but also because it's no longer officially considered to be part of the Conjuring universe. But I'm still gonna include it in this ranking. I definitely didn't love it, but I enjoyed it. It had a very different feel to it than any of the other movies in the franchise. It had this different tone, playing out more like a mystery thriller. Plus, it's certainly the most tenuously connected film. All of the other spin-off films, the Nuns, the Annabelles, have their introduction and origins in one of the core Conjuring films. This one has a very brief reference to a character from the first Annabelle, but the connection is certainly not an integral aspect of the story, so this one does feel a bit removed from the rest of the franchise. It bills itself as a horror movie and tries to be one, but the horror elements are the weakest aspects. Like many of the other spin-offs, it does make use of a lot of jump scares, but for some reason, they don't stand out as particularly irritating to me in this one. In fact, the most disappointing element of the horror here is actually the character of La Llorona. I think the backstory and legend is very interesting, but the actual look of her just doesn't reach that level of creepiness that we've seen from all of the other antagonists in the franchise. Luckily, I have no problem viewing this as a supernatural mystery thriller, that it actually is, and so the lack of real scares doesn't really bother me here. Plus, this movie features Linda Cardellini in the lead role. Aside from Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, this franchise hasn't exactly been overrun by standout performances, but I think Cardellini is really good in this role and elevates the film as a result. Coming in at number 4, Annabelle Comes Home. Back in 2014, if you had told me that Annabelle was gonna have not one, but two pretty decent sequels, I never would have believed you. But here we are. This particular movie is a really unique one within the franchise for a few reasons. First, as of right now, this is the only spin-off film that doesn't serve as some sort of origin story. We know what the deal is with the Annabelle doll at this point, so the movie doesn't have to waste any time establishing that. This one's also pretty unique due to its interconnectedness with the rest of the Conjuring universe. For the most part, the movies all do a pretty good job of tying into one another, but this is the only spin-off to, briefly, feature Ed and Lorraine Warren in the main film, and almost feels like a bit of a greatest hits culmination due to the prominent incorporation of the artifact room into the story. Because this movie's almost exclusively set in the Warrens' house, with all the creepy, cursed, and possessed things they've ever collected, the sky was the limit. This movie could have done anything, and it entertainingly did a little of everything. We saw the return of some of the creepy antagonists and artifacts that made appearances in previous films, like Annabelle and Rory's mirror music box, but also got to see quite a few new things as well, many of which I wouldn't mind seeing getting their own spin-off movies. This film primarily focuses on a small group of teenagers, and does get bogged down by some frustratingly dumb character decisions at times, but it still manages to be the most fun movie in the franchise. Part haunted house story, part possession movie, part haunted board game movie. It's got a little of everything. Coming in at number 3, The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. I know why they gave this third film the subtitle they did, but I still think it was a mistake. Simply, The Conjuring 3 would have been much better, but I already digress. I'll admit that I was a little wary of this one, mostly because it was the first core Conjuring film that James Wan wasn't directing. His absence from the director's chair was definitely noticeable at times, but he's still got his fingerprints all over this one, so it still feels like a cohesive part of the trilogy from that perspective. The cinematography is great, as usual, as are the characters of Ed and Lorraine Warren. This movie's set in 1981, and so at this point in the series, these characters have been together for decades, which could be a little tough to pull off believably, but Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga are certainly up to the task once again. Of the core Conjuring films, this is definitely the outlier of the trilogy, largely due to the story. While the previous two films were variations on haunted house possession stories, this one's a little bit different, and finds Ed and Lorraine in a more traditional investigative role than we're used to seeing from them. They still have their great moments of paranormal investigation, but they're comparatively few and far between, and there's an almost over-reliance on the supernatural here. It feels a bit out of step with the rest of the trilogy, and has the unfortunate side effect of decreasing the overall tension a bit, but I still do appreciate the unique for the franchise direction that the story went. Coming in at number 2, The Conjuring 2. Although this is the second of the core Conjuring films, it's the third movie in the franchise, coming on the heels of Annabelle, and I gotta say, I was very nervous about this one when I first saw it. Luckily, those doubts were put to bed very quickly, and it was clear that The Conjuring 2 was a return to form for the franchise. For me, Ed and Lorraine Warren are really the heart and soul of these movies, so it probably comes as no surprise that all the movies they're featured in are my favorites in the franchise. Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga still have wonderful chemistry together, and both give great performances again here. This movie also does a really good job of expanding on their characters. They get fleshed out a bit more here, and we get an even better sense of the dynamics of their relationship, and what each of them brings to the investigations. Compared to the almost clinical approach of the investigation in the first Conjuring film, this movie takes a much more emotion-forward approach. And this applies to everything. The family at the center of the haunting, the Warrens, even the film's horror style. It's all much more in your face this time around. There's still some good tension building, and it's not like it's overrun with jump scares, but it doesn't quite have the same creepy atmosphere as the first film. Instead, the horror feels a little more blatant. Aside from a few moments of iffy CGI with the Crooked Man, I wouldn't say that blatancy is really a bad thing. It's just a different approach to telling the story. And I think it works well here, because this movie isn't just about those classically scary, tangible things. It's also about internal, personal fears, and we get that through the emotional responses of our characters, especially Lorraine. So that means my number one Conjuring Universe film is The Conjuring. Probably not the most unexpected choice for the top spot, but can you really blame me? This movie is fantastic. Not only is it my favorite of the franchise, but it's my favorite horror movie of the last decade, and one of my favorite horror movies of all time. This is a period piece with some really impressive production design and superb cinematography. And honestly, it's just such an all around well crafted movie. It has the atmospheric tension building of a slow burn horror, but it doesn't feel like a slow burn. There are never any moments that drag or feel boring. And I think that's because not only do you get invested in the characters, both the central family and the Warrens, but also because the tension continues to build throughout the movie. It never reaches a plateau. It just grows and grows and grows until the sudden spike of that wild and scary finale. One of the interesting things about this movie is just how unexpectedly good it actually is. On paper, it doesn't really sound like anything overly special or unique. The story itself is a fairly standard haunting possession tale, but it's the way that it's told that sets it apart. Like I said before, we have a set of characters that we actually care about. They're believable and relatable, so it's easy to root for them, both for the family to survive their ordeal, but also for the Warrens to successfully help with their investigation. As I mentioned with some of the other movies, the Warrens are my favorite part of this franchise, and this movie not only introduces these characters to us, but also showcases just how good the chemistry between Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga is. Alright, so that's my rankography of the Conjuring Universe. 9 movies, 2 paranormal investigators, and 1 room full of some creepy stuff. What does your ranking look like? I'd love to see some reasoning for your order, so be sure to post it in the comments below. Remember, I've already reviewed all 9 of these movies, so you can check those videos out if you want some more in-depth discussion of each, as well as my ratings, pros and cons, and even tailored film recommendations. And if you're interested in buying any of these movies, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this rankography, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button, and if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe if you're at it to see more videos like this, as well as movie reviews. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainely Movies. The way life should be.